That's the impression of Achem that his story left. Although he had dedicated the greater part of his early life to studying and teaching the goddess's moral, as was his duty, during his later years, Maz Achem had changed drastically. He had become a dissenter, a reformist guilty of several immoral acts, the first of which was the abandonment of his post as ambassador to the Grand Empire, a decision he made without even announcing it to the temple, and which he never explained. Upon his return to Ith, he seeded disorder in several gatherings of Imaz, going as far as to persecute the great priests in their own temples. This conduct alone would have been enough to discredit him, but what drove him to these extreme acts was even worse, on the verge of sacrilegious. He absolutely insisted that others listen to him, but all the Imhas had already heard enough. Achem was asking the great priests to make a profound modification in their interpretation of certain precepts of the moral of Eurydice. However, he himself recognized his inability to present any convincing argument. If he indeed had reasons, Maz Achem never provided them. Of course the Imaz priests refused, encouraging him to return to ideas more in line with those of the temple. He persisted in his efforts, though, embarking on a campaign of public speeches in which he presented his theories, even though they had already been judged as antithetical to the moral by the wisest of our wise, despite Maz Achem's esteemed position. Faced with his obstinacy, the Imaz had no other choice but to declare him a heretic, the highest dishonor, and to revoke his title of Maz, something that has only occurred 4 times in our history. Their punishment at least had its anticipated effect. Achem ended up abandoning his futile and harmful crusade and left to settle in Mesteb, where he died a few years after, never again attempting to corrupt Eurydice's teachings. My father had nothing else to add. He asked me if I had learned something from the story, as if he had just told me a simple religious fable. I said I had, and made a vow to never betray Eurydice's moral, which is what he expected of me. Still, I was perplexed. Up until then, everything that I had been taught rested on these 3 values: knowledge, tolerance, and peace. The 3 virtues of the wise ones, the 3 steps to climb to reach the moral. During my ancestors' era, hadn't the Imaz disregarded one of the first 2? Weren't Achem's ideas as a Maz and high figure of the temple worthy of interest? I immediately regretted this disrespectful thought and tried hard to forget it, unsuccessfully. By following my curiosity, I disturbed peace, but in turning a blind eye to my doubts, I insulted knowledge and tolerance. Why had Maz Achem been silenced? I decided to find out. Braced against the open sea off the Laurelian coast, only a few leagues from a nearly nameless village, there is a small uninhabited island. An island like the dozens of others that dot the Median Sea with barren beaches, rocky landscapes, and shorelines made jagged by untiring waves. An island that is only recorded by the occasional eccentric or overly meticulous cartographer as a simple speck on a few rare pieces of parchment, which, after time, could easily be confused for an indiscernible smudge. However, this island, ignored by most men, fascinated a handful. Among them was the judge Zamarine, the secret spiritual chief of the Laurelian messengers, and even more secretly, the uncontested master of all the Zuïa priests in the upper kingdoms. "How much longer?" Zamarine asked the captain. The captain, an old fisherman, jumped. It was the first time the judge had spoken to him. Up to that point, he had only dealt with the youngest Zuïa, the judge's footman, no doubt. While the fisherman got along just fine with the younger one, the judge seemed difficult. Worse, his cold, scornful stare was impossible to hold. 2 centidays, maybe. Long enough for the dawn to clear," he answered nervously. "With this headwind, I can't do better than that." "That is much too long." The fisherman didn't know how to respond.